Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzi Feay. I've got a YA book bag because we will be talking YA for the next hour or so. It's going to be quite crowded here in the book bag. You may remember when I interviewed Jeremy Dyson and Andy Nyman for their excellent spy thriller, The Warlock Effect. And we all crammed in together. We're going to do something very similar today. I'm always fascinated by people who collaborate on novels, and that's what we're going to be talking about, because I have an amazing duo of authors. One author, very, very practiced and skilled, and indeed prize winning, hitched to a debutante. So it's going to be very fascinating to find out how that all worked out, especially since they are mother and son. So let us invite them into the book bag. Everybody breathe in, we can all fit. Wonderful. Hello, Jenny Downham and Louis Hill. It is lovely to have you in the book bag.
Thank you for having us.
Lovely to be here.
So we met, there was a lovely kind of pre-launch lunch for this, for people to get to know you. And we did have a little bit of a chat about collaboration. And I wanted to have you on the book bag, invite you here to talk about how it works. As I said, I find it fascinating. Writing is such a lonely business. People in their attics and their garrets, you know, doing their thing. And I think it was Louis who said something along the lines of leaving almost a little gift for the next person to pick up the thread, or perhaps leaving a little problem for the next person to pick up the thread. I'll start with you, Jenny. How did you get the idea to collaborate on, I should say what the book is, Let the Light In, fabulous YA novel?
Lou and I were both writers. Lou had went to drama school, and when he was there, and also when he finished, he was writing plays and short stories. And I'd seen one of his plays, and he'd not shown me a word of it before I turned up in the audience, and I liked it very much. And after that, we suggested doing something together, which wasn't this book straight away. It was a TV pilot, which we absolutely loved writing together. And we kind of hawked that around different TV producers, and it's still up for grabs if anyone's interested. But we had a lot of really positive feedback, and we had such a lovely time. And then we didn't really do anything else. And then COVID happened. Lou came home to Bubble, and we decided to set each other writing tasks. And this book started really just from a kind of a fun way to pass the time in a pandemic.
So you're a prize winner, as I've said. I mean, you're the novel that really struck me, and why I wanted to chat to you, is Before I Die, an incredible novel. I mean, you can't make it to the end of that novel without absolutely blubbing. Louis, what was your approach to your mum's writing? I mean, have you read them all? I have met children of authors who just go, God, I wouldn't read their stuff, you know. I mean, have you been a fan, as it were?
I have read every single one of Mum's books. I read them, sometimes proof copies of them. I remember having Before I Die as a proof copy, just had a red cover on it, and that was my reading book at school. I was sort of working through my mum's book. And then the subsequent books, some of which I read late drafts of as a kind of teenager to provide a little bit of feedback here and there on teenager stuff, and as another set of eyes. So Mum's writing has always been in my life. And indeed, when Before I Die came out, it represented kind of a real shift in our lives. It changed so much of my life and my world at sort of 12 years old. It's kind of one of the most important books in my life, I think, because of that. And yeah, to have Mum's writing around me growing up this whole time, I think probably made this process even more seamless than it often was.
And was Before I Die a debut, or, I mean, it was obviously a breakthrough book, but was it your first?
My first book, which was called A Map of Everything, which was a title actually provided by Louis when he was about 8, never made it into publication. It was a book that had every single idea I ever had in it. It was way too long. It lay very much on the cusp of, was it for adults? Was it for young adults? And a lot of people were interested in it, but when people talked about editing, it was, can you cut this character? Can you shave that character? And everybody's ideas were different, and I didn't know how. So I wrote a second book, and that was Before I Die. So I'd probably had about 3 years novel writing under my belt before I Die came out. But I'd always written short stories, poems, all sorts.
The writer Chris Fowler had similar experiences, and he said, it's, if everybody tells you that something needs fixing, but it's always a different thing, you're probably in the clear. If everybody homes in on one thing and says, yeah, get rid of that character, then that's sort of what you should do. So maybe with a few tweaks that might reappear. Do you think is it a practice piece now? Do you not want to go back?
Funny, themes from it have come up in other books, and in fact Unbecoming is the book that's most similar to it, because one of the things that was problematic at the time was it had a point of view character who was an elderly woman, and at the time publishers were saying, well, you can't have that in a young adult book. Young adults won't be interested in that. And so when I rewrote that character for Unbecoming, I put a lot of her teenage years in it, so it had a kind of wider historical span than it originally did. So I've kind of plundered a lot of it. There's still a bit left to plunder, but thematically, I have certain tropes I keep returning to.
So it's like a little quarry. You can chip a few bits out every so often, but you don't need to. Yeah, there's no kind of inexpressed sort of Michelangelo's David still in there.
I wish.
That would be quite fun. So the finished copy arrived with me this morning, actually. So here it is. Let the Light In. The quote is from Leonard Cohen. Where do you start with a title? Does a title kind of gradually come to you, or do you get them all from Louis?
She gets them all from me.
Yeah,
that's what it is. I come up with all the titles. It's all me.
All the best ideas.
I always think a title is in the book, and I mean literally in the book. Like, you just have to go through and you will find the actual title. And that didn't happen with this book. So there were lots of references to light, but that actual Let the Light In was kind of obliquely referred to. It's not the exact Leonard Cohen quote either, I think, but yeah. So the Leonard Cohen lyric was referred to in the book, and we kind of got it through that avenue. But we had probably 50 titles before we had one that got the most votes.
It's quite an oblique title. So you have two characters. There's a brother and a sister, and I wonder, Louis, do you kind of bring Charlie in? Do you bring the Charlie energy? Is that how it works?
Yes, quite early on, it became very clear that we were taking a character each. So I write the Charlie chapters and Mum writes the Leah chapters, and for me, getting to write Charlie and the Charlie energy that permeates his chapters in the book it was just so much fun, and I could pepper in my own occasional experiences of being a 15-year-old boy growing up in London, and it was a character that I just was so happy to be able to take ownership of, to the point where maybe once or twice as an exercise wrote the other character just as see what it would be like. But ultimately, this process of I take one, Mum takes one, and we hand chapters back and forth became the kind of way that we did it.
Right. Okay. So that's the stories dovetail. Both of them have secrets. Both of them are doing quite naughty things. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but that I can understand the structure now because the chapters sort of alternate. But that leads to an interesting technical challenge that the stories have to sort of be level, you know, the level of intrigue, the level of peril has to kind of match. I mean, did you start at the beginning of the story and go all the way through finding new things along the way, or were you having big structural conversations and putting things on post-it notes?
Both of those things, yeah. So when we were bubbled together during COVID, we wrote a rough first draft, and we wrote that quite quickly. And that was when Louis had the brilliant and terrifying idea of writing a chapter on alternate days. So he would write a chapter of Charlie, hand it to me with, as you said earlier, a kind of a little secret or a hook or a problem, and then I would have to write a response the following day. My response to him when he suggested this was, don't be ridiculous. It takes me at least 6 weeks to write a chapter. But what it did was it provoked this kind of galloping narrative, which had a lot going for it. It had massive gaps in it too. So by the end, you know, we just got rid of people if we didn't like writing them. We added people in who'd be quite fancy bringing on board. There were massive gaps. If it was kind of a series of bridges, there were gaps everywhere where you couldn't get across the river. And in a way, that became quite problematic, because once you've got that lovely energy to go backwards and fill in those gaps and introduce characters who stay for the course of the novel, actually feels quite ploddy after that. So after that first draft, we just sort of stopped. Louis moved out, went back to his life, and I went back to different projects. But we missed it. And we just kept saying, that was really fun. Don't you care about them? I really care about them. Shall we do a second draft? And it was those second, third, fourth, probably fifth, however many drafts it was, that became drafts that we ended up, we wrote new bits, but also we began to edit each other, which is not something we've done before. And we had days where we did kind of quite acty things. So we both got an acting background, and we'd kind of walk and talk. We'd talk about props and scenery and geography, and we had massive bits of wallpaper, that kind of underlying paper that's completely white, and we'd unroll that and draw all over it. So it took a while to get the finished book. A lot of that first draft is still in there, though. So thematically, a lot of it remained.
Charlie's story is that he is a very gifted artist, and there's quite a bit about, I don't want to give too much of the way the plot operates, but there's quite a bit about the art world and how art is sold. Money is also a very crucial aspect of it. In their different ways, the pair need money. What is your background in that, Louis? Is that just a pure bit of research, talking to, say, a gallery owner, or are you an artist as well?
I'm not an artist in the sense that, like, painting and drawing. No, so all of that, the particulars of that world required us to go out there and research and talk to people and uncover more of what this world could be like and how much it fit into the story we were telling. I am an actor, so I know what it is to have this other creative outlet and to be a young man who has something he wants to pursue creatively and wants to express himself with, and isn't always sure how or when to or what form that can take. And so I think a lot of the ways Charlie feels about his art, I've felt at different times about my art, and it felt really important to make sure that theme of creativity and expressing yourself through whatever medium that is just permeated throughout. That being said, when we would write stuff in this rush period where we were doing a chapter a day, and then we'd have to come back to it later and go, is that even, how does that work? I don't know. Is that possible? Is that, and that's where the research came in. And that's where talking to people who work in that world or have experience in that world was so useful, because they might tell us something that we would never consider to put into the book. And suddenly it opens up this whole avenue of possibilities for where our characters can go or where the story can go. But in terms of specific drawing, no, my brother did much more actual drawing than I did. And it definitely took some research to get used to that world.
And Charlie is younger than Leah, and she is really quite a bossy big sister. And I wondered, I mean, is that the mum energy coming in? Because she's very having secrets of her own and things that she needs to grapple with. She's very, Charlie, do this, do that. It's a lovely dynamic between the two of them.
I think that's the first time anybody's suggested that quite so coherently. Yes, I'm sure. We didn't want to write a story about a mother and son. And our TV script was about a mother and son, but obviously that was probably a less useful dynamic for a young adult novel. So it made sense that my character that I wrote was the older sister. And I'm not sure I'd use the word bossy. I think she has a great deal of responsibility on her very young shoulders. And as a result, she's spinning a lot of plates and is terrified of any of them falling to the floor. I think one of the things that was always really important to us, this is a family with a lot of love in it. They have their problems, but and their secrets, but ultimately, they care deeply for one another and for their younger sibling and their mum as well.
Louis, did you do any research at all in the YA field, as it's now known as? Did you sort of read YA novels? You've obviously got a fast track through Jenny into that world, but do you know much about that sphere of publishing? Did you know before you embarked on this?
You're absolutely right that having my mum be who my mum is has been incredibly useful and a total fast track and a huge amount of privilege in that respect. And part of that is YA publishing has kind of been in my household for a couple of decades. Mum's first book came out, and as I say, it changed our lives a bit. And the more books that came out and the older I got, the more, we would just discuss what Mum's work is. That being said, when this book, it's only towards the end of us finishing this book and then having to engage with the publishing world that I had to really turn my focus to it and start to understand it and learn more. The process of writing the book, we rarely spoke about how this book would perform commercially or who would, we considered readers and we considered the age of our readers and we considered what kinds of people would get something out of this story. But there was very little conversation about how a book gets published. It was more just riding this wave of writing this book together and how much we enjoyed it. So then as the process came to a close and we had to start thinking about, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to do something with this book? Do we want to send it to some people? Yes. Then I had to quite quickly learn how parts of this industry work. And I'm still learning it, every day as each new email comes through or each new opportunity comes through. It's a really fun challenge to get to find out more about this side of the industry.
I mean, I suppose it's storytelling at its most basic form, as is TV script writing. There are all forms of storytelling. So there's, as we say, transferable skills. But I mean, I've watched the YA market and read a lot of YA. This is a thriller, and the pair of them, they've got adult problems, as Jenny has said. There's a lot of plates to spin. And I was wondering, how dark can you go? Is there anything that's off limits? Jenny, what do you think about how the market is developing in terms of subject matter?
When Before I Die came out, there was a kind of a bit of a fuss about something. I don't know if you remember the title Sick Lit. There were a few books that came out around the same time, like Fault in Our Stars and my book, as well as a couple of others. And I was asked a lot, why write about difficult things? You know, our lives are full of difficult things. The world is often an unkind place. And my argument then, and my argument now, is that I think books provide a safe space to look at difficult things. Now, having said that, there's a way of doing it. I'm not sure I would say our book is, I don't know if I'd use the word dark. I think it's complex. I think there are subject matters in it, such as grief, such as mental health, such as breakdown of relationships and friendships. And as we've referred to earlier, there's a very complicated relationship that Leah has with somebody. And I think the way to handle that is to deal with it as honestly and truthfully as possible, to do as good research as possible, to explore the strata of every single one of the things that you're looking at. So I do have a problem with books that are, I suppose, using excessive or gratuitous violence or sex or any of those things. I don't think they're appropriate. And books, obviously, there's a lot of gatekeepers. There's the teachers, there's the librarians, there's the publishers, there's the editors. And I guess I just feel that when I was growing up, for me, books were a place where I could explore things that I wouldn't want to explore in real life, but allowed me to think about what choices I might make, or whether I agreed or disagreed with the character's choices. So in terms of Leah's complex relationship, she embarks upon this as a relief from her responsibilities. She is pursuing happiness without thought, in a way. And there's a way of looking at that and saying, you know, society often condemns young women who express their sexuality or who seek happiness in the ways that she does. And there's another way of saying, well, actually, she's vulnerable and therefore she's perhaps more open to being persuaded by somebody who should have withheld their attention. But there's also other people in the book who look at that through different lenses, so that it provides a focus and a talking point. And I don't think my job as an author is to teach, but to offer different perspectives with as much honesty and complexity as I can, in order for it to be discussed and thought about by the readers.
Again, without going too much into who does what and how they interact, there is a character called Alex who joins the two of them in surprising ways. They both have interactions with somebody who's older, but not that much older. He's in his late 20s, a character called Alex. And it would have been very easy to make him into a villain. He's very definitely not a villain. You know, I mean, all of them are flawed. All of them. He has less excuse because he is the adult, right? But I was very interested in that. I mean, to bring Louis in here, how much did you sort of discuss those kind of issues as you were writing? And did you, in this alternating chapter thing that you did, in a way, you both had to have a take on this character, Alex. So were there sort of fruitful discussions around him?
He was definitely a character that because we both write him and because he's not a point of view character, we had to calibrate him quite carefully, I think. And he had a few different versions. There were definitely a couple of versions where he was worse, you know, and versions where he was less worse, depending on your perspective and how you want to look at him. We thought it's always been really important to us. And I think for me, it comes from my acting background, that judging your characters is probably not a good idea. If you're trying to play a character as an actor, you need to figure out what makes them tick and why they are the way they are without doing it in too much of a judgmental way. Otherwise, you don't present a human. And that's kind of the angle we took to all our characters, and Alex included. We discussed the ways that he is, just like everyone else in the book, a slightly flawed human on some level, trying his best and messing up fairly frequently. And so that calibration, those conversations were ongoing and constant. And we wanted to make sure that any themes that he was a part of, any of the complex or adult themes that may permeate this book, it was never black and white, that his part in it was always something that would elicit conversation, and was the kind of he was the kind of character that some people might have different opinions of, or indeed your opinion of him might change as you move through the book. And that felt really exciting, I think, to write, and to and also to explore how he comes across in each character's chapters, because he's seen differently by both Leah and Charlie. He is a different man to each of them, and he represents different things in some ways. And so I personally found that really fun to be able to write that.
Was there a plan all along that he would somehow dovetail in that way, or was that a light bulb kind of, oh my God, he should be the guy who?
He was always in both stories, and one of the issues was how to get the stories to meet, because if you've got two characters who both have a point of view and they've both got secrets that are not known by the other one, you can't have a chapter where Charlie goes, by the way, Leah, I've got these massive secrets I want to tell you, because the reader is going, but we already know, this is a really boring chapter now. So that was the hardest thing, to have I mean, there are obviously other characters. They have a little sister and they have a mum, and both of them write, both Louis and I had to write those characters too, but they live with them. So it was easier, but to find the reason to have Alex in both of their lives was one of the challenges. I was a bit like, we needed to build a bridge, but once we got it, it maybe was a bit of a light bulb moment, but it's kind of afterwards you think, oh, it was obvious all along, but it wasn't.
So Louis, talk a little bit about their family situation and why they are in the fix that they are. You sort of, right at the beginning, they have problems. It's not that things were going fine and then things weren't going fine. You decided to put them right into the problems right at the beginning. So what is the situation at the start?
So the situation at the start is that Leah and Charlie are experiencing grief, and they're experiencing it, or they're dealing with it in different ways. For Leah, it's a chance. She deals with it as a chance to explore love and relationships outside of the family. And as we've said, it's complex. It's risky love, but for her, it's a sense of control. It's a sense of escape. It's so many of the things that her family life isn't offering her. They have a mum who is kind of stuck in her grief. She is not moving forwards, and that means that both siblings have to take on a lot more responsibility around the house. So for Charlie, the way his grief is manifesting is that he is running away from it, really. He is trying to find ways to cover it up, and art is an important part of his life and an important part of his story, but it's not necessarily something he sees or looks at in that way. And so instead he goes to a party. He gets involved with maybe some people he shouldn't, that live near him. And it's those choices that in the moment, I think so many people might well make. From a distance, it's easy to look at some of the characters and go, well, in any book, why do they do those things? And we wanted to make sure that our characters were making choices that were often not always the best ones for them, but that felt real and realistic and felt totally understandable given the situation that they're in at the beginning of the book.
Charlie has a big issue with feelings of confidence and self-worth, and that is very much why he makes some of the decisions that he does. And he's set against this background of friends. Could you talk a little bit about male friendship, especially at that age? That's really part of his, well, I mean, we can talk about female friendships as well. That's part of Leah's story, but let's talk about Charlie and his mates.
Oh God, I mean, I in some ways, it's in that age, and it's also in all your ages. I think I'm 29 now, and that's a weird age to be as well, trying to understand friends and friendships and how that all works. And I thought about myself at 15 and thought about all the tiny things that feel so important and the ways in which friendships develop and progress. A big theme of the book is mental health. And for me, it's only as I've moved through my 20s that I've started to be able to open up about it to friends or family or publicly, as the case may be. And I wanted to make sure that it was a big theme of our book and that it was shown as something that is really important to talk about, and especially for young men. And the world is getting a little bit better at talking about this kind of stuff. But I know that when I was 15, it certainly wasn't something I was discussing with my friends particularly. And so we wanted to demonstrate male friendships, young male friendships that have support networks, even if they're not always obvious, and even if it can be a bit awkward, or it can be uncomfortable, or it can be stilted and monosyllabic, that that it's so vital to just be aware of the people around you and how 9 times out of 10 they want the best thing for you. And I think it was such a big part of writing Charlie's story, to make sure that his mental health, the ways he deals with it or doesn't deal with it, and the people around him were all totally entwined.
And he has this crushing sense also that the girls are not going to like him. They're going to like boys who are much brasher and much more confident. And I guess he gets to see that not everybody is as confident as they appear to be. And that he doesn't have to apologize for himself or make. One of his problems is he makes himself bigger than he really is in order, to make a bid for friendship and connection. And I guess his arc is that he realizes in the end he can just be himself.
I think I'm really aware of the kind of the building rhetoric, especially targeted at sort of young men, of like, you've got to be out there, you've got to be grinding all the time, you've got to be making money, you need all these streams of income, you've got to be an alpha, whatever. And I think there's some value somewhere in that about, like, I don't know, having ambition, but I think it can be really dangerous and really pernicious and really get under the skin of people in a way that is not healthy. And I wanted to show a character who has some of those themes in his life, the need to be a provider at any cost, and to go where the money is, and to be the man of the household, and just see if we could challenge some of those ideas of masculinity, or what it is to be a young man, or becoming a man, or what it is to have male role models in your life as well, and to explore that. And so Charlie's journey is definitely one of self-discovery, and some of the lessons are tied in with just about him sometimes thinking he's doing all right just as he is.
And female friendships, Jenny, they're slightly different. I get the feeling that with female friendships, they're sometimes a bit too in your face. The disapproving, or, oh, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. Talk a little bit about Leah and what are her kind of networks? What's helping her or hindering her?
Well, Leah, as we've said, is a young carer, and so she has a lot of practical tasks. She manages the household, the finances, the shopping, a lot of the childcare for her younger sibling. Her mother rarely leaves the house. She also provides a lot of emotional support to her mother. And that's quite a strong female link there, because one of the things that we discussed when we were writing the book was how much is Leah disabling her own mother, in the sense of she feels needed and worth something because she's managing everything. And there are times in the book when her mum suggests, well, I could just perhaps go and get, the little sister from school, or maybe I should talk to a neighbour, or maybe I should. And Leah's like, no, we don't need any of that. And so secrecy, how much you do and don't talk, how much you do and don't open up, neighbours, community, friendship is a massive theme in the book. So Leah has one strong female friend who's the same age as her. She's called Ganelle, and they've planned to go to university together. They've both applied to the same uni. They're both academically very gifted. But when Leah begins this new complex relationship with a guy, she begins to withdraw from Ganelle. And again, we wanted readers to perhaps ask, why would you do that? Why do you not, with your best friend, just go, hey, I met this guy, he's amazing, let me tell you all about it? She doesn't do that. She deliberately doesn't say anything. And when she does, Ganal's response is perhaps not what she hoped for. So it was very important to us that we, as we said, had different lenses to look through this relationship. Leah also has a relationship with a female teacher who has always believed in her and is very supportive. So again, we were kind of just wanting to say, there are things that Abby says it quite well, the little girl, she says there's good and bad secrets, and the kind that you're allowed to have are the ones that you can soon tell people, like a birthday surprise. Those kind of secrets are fine. It's the other kind that are sometimes a bit problematic. And so the idea of what you should and shouldn't tell people, and whose health is it for? Leah worries when she tells Ganal about the relationship. What will the guy think if he knows I'm saying anything? And that's a big red flag, isn't it? If you're kind of thinking, oh, if my boyfriend is going to mind I tell someone about him, what does that mean? So yeah, it was really important to look at friendship and what you can talk about.
And the mum idea, in a lot of books for young adults and younger than young adults, the parents need to be got out of the way. And, the mum is sort of out of the way in this sense of, being very ill. But again, it would be very easy to sort of say, lazy mum, why doesn't she get out of bed and do what? Why can she not see that these children are struggling? It's partly because they're very good at covering their tracks, right? But again, she's not a bad mum. She's a core character, not a major character. And it's interesting what you said, Louis, about being an actor, because of course, if you're say a Bond villain, you think you're fantastic. The villain isn't sort of going, I'm a really bad person. They have a point of view and they're completely justified in what they do. So I think that's a very interesting way of looking at character building, really. Have you ever played any big villains?
I did a play at the Edinburgh Fringe, this year's Edinburgh Fringe, and in that I played a particularly nasty character who does really, really bad things. And it's one of the first times I've played someone quite so terrible. And you have to not judge them. You've got to figure out why they think they're in the right and why they are the main character of their own lives. And you've got to put that person in front of the audience and not be afraid of the things you're either saying or showing, because it's part of the play. And it's absolutely true, I think, of writing as well. And Mum often says that if you're all the characters, you should want to play them. If this was a film or if this was a play, even the side characters, do you want to play them? Is this an interesting enough character? Do they have enough of an arc that you would be happy if you were cast as them? And I think that's such a great way of ensuring that even the briefest of characters that appear in a story all have vibrant lives behind them and have a reason to be there.
And there's something about dialogue there as well, isn't there? That did you find you were writing dialogue that you could hear in your head and you could almost say it?
I say it out loud often when I'm writing it. I love writing dialogue. I think it's the closest thing to writing plays, because plays are often just a bunch of dialogue. It's people talking. So I often read out loud the things that I've written down, and as an actor, I read a lot of audiobooks. I'm a narrator for audiobooks, so it feels natural to write a chapter and then just give it a go. See what it sounds like. Does this feel like something someone would actually say? Is this sayable? Are these lines sayable? And if they're not, maybe you need to go back and look at your dialogue. And if they are, you're probably on the right track.
Jenny, you mentioned you also had a background in acting. Is that right?
Yeah, so I studied English and drama at university, and then I went to drama school after that. And my first career was as an actor, but I worked in community theatre. So I worked for a theatre company called Tellers Theatre, who were funded by the London Arts Board. And our job was to take theatre to places which didn't have access to it. And what that meant was often our audiences were incarcerated, and we were booked by the gatekeepers. So we played a lot of prisons, a lot of young offenders institutes. We went to places where there wouldn't normally be theatre, like housing estates, youth clubs. And we went again and again, because often the first time you go, if the kids are in a youth club, they're like, well, what happened to the table tennis table? We'll come back to more. when you're not here.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, we developed relationships because we didn't take scripted plays. We were improvising stories, and the audience could interject and change what happened. So it was an amazing apprenticeship for discovering what works structurally, how to keep the audience interested, what makes somebody kind of metaphorically turn a page on the stage. It was all incredibly useful, and it meant that Louis and I had a kind of shorthand as well, because we both talked about, well, we always talk about props or offstage or costumes or motivation or whatever, lots and lots of terminology that actors use. And similarly, I've always been quite dialogue heavy in my books. And I think we were both, again, drawn to the way that dialogue can really help in terms of the galloping narrative. It can really help.
Mm-hmm. And talking about editing each other, which you did briefly earlier on, were you both on the same page, as it were? Were there any serious discussions about I don't like what you did there, or reel him in a bit? What were the discussions with the editing? And Louis, from your point of view, as kind of the less experienced in this particular form of writing, if not in others' forms of writing, what were you happy to be corrected? Were you corrected?
I was corrected, but I also did some correcting. I think when we started off, partly because we were doing these rush chapters, in a sense, there was nothing you could do that was. We were handing over completely raw work, and we had to get quite good at that feeling. It's quite revealing to hand over something you've written in a day. Yeah. You've not really had time to edit properly. It's just there, and to know that the other person is not looking at it for fine line excellence, but rather what ideas are there here. So once we got past that point and we started providing feedback on each other's work or suggested edits, definitely I, at least in the early part of the process, deferred sometimes, more often than not, to some of the ideas Mum had. But I think as we progressed, and as by the first year, basically, probably we ended up disagreeing more often, because I would just say, I actually think this, and suddenly we'd have to have a discussion about it. We had a pretty good rule, I think, that we almost never compromised. If you wanted to change something, or you thought something should be a certain way, you had to convince the other person. You had to put your argument out there, and you had to go, this is why it's right. It was very rarely, oh, I'll do it because we agreed to that other thing that you said and I owe you one. It was all about the story as a whole, and the best way to make it as good as it could be.
And what was it like for you, Jenny?
It was daunting. I think, it's very difficult having a mother's head and a professional head with your child, because I want everything Louis does. I want to say it's brilliant, and mostly it is, Lou, I'd say.
It's fine. You made it clear at the time that...
But obviously, he's not bringing home his painting from nursery school. This is a professional book that we're co-writing, and I did have a lot more editorial experience. So I think, Lou's right. At the beginning, he would perhaps go, oh, yeah, no, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah. And then he began to send me my chapters back with red marks all over them. And that was kind of an interesting process. But because he's very experienced with plays and short stories, it's not that different, really. I mean, he knows what makes a good story. So a lot of his edits were absolutely spot on. And I think his point about never compromising, that felt really important. We did not want to fudge, because there's a real danger if you're calibrating two voices, you end up with something in the middle that's just a bit rubbish. But I mean, although we did have lots of discussions, we never once, I can't think of a single time when we were just sort of, furious. That it was just, we just keep talking, and we'd keep, I'd draw it out, I'd write it out, Lou would do the same, and just try and convince the other one. And then eventually, you kind of thought, actually, you're right, I see it.
I think we did a good job of compartmentalizing the process as well. So it was rare that we would actually write new work in the same room. We would often do that separately. But in the times when we were in the same room, maybe talking about structure or rearranging scenes, and if it was getting a little bit tense, we'd be, at Mum's house, I think this. a timer would go off, and we go, right, cup of tea. Have you seen what the neighbours have been up to? We go into the other room, and then another timer would go off, and we come back into the room and go, and another thing. I think this should go here. But we kept it. It felt like these two different relationships, and for me, and for Mum, I think that it really worked quite well.
It sounds like a miniature version of a writer's room, which you have on sitcoms and things. I mean, there's only two of you, and I gather there's whole teams of people. But that I mean, you're writing separately, but you're also sparking ideas off each other. There must be a time when you get an idea that you wouldn't have had on your own, neither of you. But well, how about this? How about that? Well, what if? So.
All the time. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Lou, the joke between Lou and I is that I would often be the kind of the dark, it's terrible things are happening here and nobody is laughing. Whereas Lou would come in, he'd come in from the other side of it and he'd bring the light in, and that felt really important. And when we did those rush chapters, he'd send a chapter and he would often give me a problem. And I'd think, I don't want to start my chapter opening a strange box that's been delivered in the middle of the night by a man wearing a mask, Louis. But I had to, because, that was how the chapter ended. And that for me was a very, very different experience. I never used to show anyone any work until it had been really finely tuned. Even my writing group, I would spend weeks honing something before I dared show it. And this was a very different way of working. And I think the closest I've ever got to it before is when I was in theatre and we would devise shows together. And there's that excitement, you can feel it building, and someone has a good idea and then you top that good idea and that gives them another good idea. It's a very exciting way of working. I do miss it. Now it's just me at my desk again.
Are you going to continue working in this way, or are you both going to go off on separate projects for the time being, having done this?
We are both currently working on separate projects at the minute. I think after we finish this one, it was such a nice kind of full stop that we both thought, well, let's just take a little time apart creatively. Obviously, we're still working together on this book, and it's, as Mum's kind of alluded to it, I miss it too. That it's an adjustment to go back to writing entirely on your own and to not have that immediate feedback, because we, like I say, we were sending such early work, and because we created this sort of safe bubble of it's just us, but we're sending this work back and forth. We had such immediate, I'm not sure about this idea. What do you think? I think this. Whoa, okay, great. You write another book and it's just you in your head wondering if it's any good, and you keep going. So we are not currently working on anything together at the minute, but whenever we see each other, I'll be home over Christmas and we will inevitably discuss story. We will inevitably discuss ideas that are bouncing around in our head. We will inevitably discuss the projects we're currently working on. And I think, never say never, probably.
And Jenny, is it changed the way you write?
I'll never work with him again.
It's changed the way I work in a sense of it might not be if you were watching me work, you'd notice any difference, because I am still very slow, whereas Louis is much quicker than me. But I think it's given me the knowledge, which I suppose you could describe as hope, which is I know I can write a chapter in a day. I know I can be quicker. And that knowledge gives you kind of a bit of faith when you're kind of thinking, I wrote a paragraph today and then tomorrow I might just rub it out because, it wasn't very good. That's kind of often how my writing days are. And so I think what I've taken away from this more than anything is the kind of, get a grip, you can do it. You just have to believe that you can be quicker than this. I mean, there is something very good. I mean, I do believe that the strata of really exploring character does happen quite slowly, and I never ever plan, and I don't want to lose that. I mean, Lou and I didn't really plan. We just kind of saw what happened. For a first draft, I never plan, and what that means is you end up with first drafts that are 150,000 words long, and you've gone down the wrong road loads of times. But I've always found that's just to be the way I work, so I don't think I'll be stopping doing that anytime soon. But yeah, hopefully it's just having the faith that I can, if necessary, write quicker.
Did you go and see Louis when he was playing this villain in Edinburgh?
I went up to Edinburgh, yes, and then it came to London. It transferred to London, so I saw it more than once. Yeah, no, he was terrifying, and it's really, it's really strange knowing someone so well and watching them embody. I mean, even he's been acting all his life, and I remember going to see him in sort of Animal Farm when he was about, I don't know, how old were you, 12 or something?
Yeah.
I thought, oh, I've never seen this side of my son before. It's really strange. But seeing him play someone so awful and the audience sort of positively shivering with horror at him was very weird.
Wow.
Yeah, but she is my mum. She has to say that. Don't. We don't.
Right. I think I will move on to the final questions, the questions that I ask everybody. So we're sort of doubling up here, so completely separate answers. How are you going to interpret favourite artwork? I'll go to you, Louis. We've had all sorts. We've had little sculptures, we've had posters, album covers. So you can interpret it whichever way you want, but what did you go for as a favourite artwork?
I went for a piece of artwork that has no name, and it is it hangs. It's actually, I can't show it to you now, but it's this piece of artwork right here. It was painted by my brother, and he did it maybe 10 years ago, and he has always had art in his life. He's always been creative, and it's not necessarily something he pursues, at least not drawing and art, as a career or anything like that, but he will often do pieces of artwork for us as presents and stuff like that. And this particular one I've had, as I say, about a decade, and it's sat on the wall of my student accommodation. It has sat in every flat that I've lived in. It is sat in every bedroom that I've had, hung on the wall. It's a pair of eyes, sort of crying colours. And I think it feels fitting that that we're talking about Let the Light In as well, because it's kind of an example of some of the characters in the book that are creative, have creativity, but it all kind of experience creativity without explicitly that being like a big part of who they are all the time. And I think I really like that this piece of art, I can glance up at it and sort of be reminded of my brother and these sides to him that aren't always on display, but are very much there.
It sounds a similar thing to watching you be a villain, you know, seeing another side to somebody, perhaps a side that is not accessible in everyday life. I think maybe that's what art can do, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's very, people all, you know, what did you mean by that? Or what's it trying to express? And sometimes it's better just to leave something for you to, you know, just enjoy as it is, or make up your own mind, or maybe have a different meaning every single day or every time you look at it. Are you familiar with this artwork he's talking about, Jenny?
I'm very familiar with it, yes.
And you have pieces as well, presumably.
I've got lots of, my other son lives with me still, and lots of his artwork is around the house. I think he gets a bit mortified by me putting it all on the wall. Yeah.
So what are you going to go for your favourite artwork?
Well, I chose The Large Blue Horses by Franz Marc. It's a painting that lots of people might know. It's these beautiful, curvaceous blue horses in a very, very bright landscape. And the reason I chose it was because when I was at school, I couldn't decide whether to do GCSE art or not, or O-level art, as it was called then. And my art teacher, who I'd enjoyed doing art up until that point, he stopped me in the corridor one day and he said, you have to do art O-level because your skirt is a Kandinsky painting. And I bought my skirt at a local market, and it was just splashed with these kind of geometric expressionist signs. And so I decided to do O-level art. I started studying Kandinsky, and he was in a group with Franz Marc called
Lower Writer?
The Blue Rider group.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, so I morphed over and just began painting with these bright, bold, curvaceous, on huge bits of cardboard and whatever we were provided with. So it's got a very special place. I don't have it. I've got my versions of it somewhere up in the loft, but I don't have it out. But I just always, whenever I see it, I feel it's a bit like, I feel a bit seen. Like I had a teacher who understood something about me and bothered to notice and support me in choosing something, which I ended up doing A-level art. I mean, I just loved it. So I'm really glad that he said that about the Kandinsky skirt.
Well, there's a lovely moment in the book we are talking about, Let the Light In, where Charlie is advised to get an easel because he will be able to make bigger gestures from his whole arm, rather than, he's been working on a board, so he's sort of doing this. And I just thought that was a fascinating insight. I hadn't really thought about that before, that you can, it's not just making a bigger image, it's somehow being freer and a kind of whole body thing. So yeah, I think that's partly what you're touching on, isn't it? This curvaceous freedom and this whole body art as a whole body experience, I think. So we then go on to the Book of Shame, and I am not seriously advocating shame. There is no shame in the book bag. It's just a little funny title. But Jenny, as a very, a prize-winning author, is there anything where you sort of think, oh, people would be surprised to know I had not read that?
There's probably quite a few books I could have chosen, but I did choose A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens because I like Charles Dickens, and I've got probably 3 people in my life who think A Tale of Two Cities is his best book. And every time they say this to me, I mean, not that we talk about it all the time, but I just feel, I'm not even sure I've ever told them. I just kind of go, yeah. So yeah, I do have it. I've had it on my shelf for years. But I've never read it.
It's not a popular view, really. I think most people would go for something like Great Expectations or Bleak House. But it does. I mean, I read it years and years and years ago. I seem to recall it has a fabulous villain. I can't remember the name, but yeah.
Mum can't tell you about it, yeah.
I'm seeing Louis in the role, actually, this character who comes in and very creepy. So
now I'm interested.
Maybe look at it from that point of view. That's an unusual one. Okay, Book of Shame, Louis, what have you got?
Catcher in the Rye.
You see, people say that. People do say that.
I think
have you avoided it?
Not intentionally. I think in some ways I really feel like I should read it. It kind of is, my understanding, having not read it, it's probably quite a good one for me to read about young male angst and coming of age kind of narrative, because that's the exact kind of stuff I like writing. Maybe for that reason I've avoided it. I don't want to be too influenced, is what I'll say on this call.
It's had a strange afterlife, and I was reading something recently about somebody who worked for the publisher, and apparently they were still getting sacks of mail for Salinger. I mean, this is a few, when he was still alive, and he didn't sort of answer anything, and the publishers had to write back, but it was still resonating with people. But I think it would be interesting. It's one of those books where they say you should have read it by a certain age, or you're not really going to get it, or maybe it isn't going to speak to you in quite the same way. And I think it's a little bit more unpleasant when you go back to it. You've read it, Jenny, have you?
I've got a copy you could borrow, Louis.
I'll read it over Christmas, maybe.
Let's get a little book club together. I think you should give each other a writing challenge, a reading challenge. Right? That would be great. I think it's probably a bit shorter than Tale of Two Cities. So
you could read it very easily in a few hours at least.
I mean, I have a feeling, I haven't read it for a long time, I have a feeling that there's a little bit of what we might call an incel vibe to it now. If we look at it now, and it's very interesting to look at in terms of a publishing phenomenon, not just a book that somebody wrote. Good choices both. Okay, so bizarre or amusing feedback. I mean, this could be an actor thing, Louis. This could be anything anybody said to you about an aspect of your acting work. As a debut novelist whose book isn't out yet, you won't have had too much feedback so far, but what have you got for us?
You're correct. I've had precious little feedback other than 3 years of mum giving me feedback. But all of that was very useful and insightful, not funny or amusing. So the feedback I once got was on another piece of writing. It was the play that mum mentioned that she came and saw several years ago. It was a one-man show that I'd written, and I put it on. And before I put it on, I showed it to a few people that I'd worked with at drama school, a few directors I'd had, just to get feedback. And one of them really struggled with the fact that it wasn't based on real events. And he really couldn't get his head around the fact that this wasn't real, and that the events of the book were all largely fictitious. Lots of myself was in there. And so he suggested, well, what you should do is when the audience comes in, they should each be handed a token. And then at the end of the play, as they're leaving, there'll be some ushers holding buckets. And the buckets can say, this was real, this was not real. And then people can vote on whether they think it was real or not. And I was like, you've completely missed the point of this. It was quite a straight, naturalistic, I mean, there were magical elements to it, but quite a naturalistic one-man show as a monologue. And the idea that this would somehow challenge what is real, what isn't, was completely not the point. And my director, who directed it, we had a bit of a laugh about this. I also didn't ask for any advice on whether we should have buckets or not, and it was offered freely, and felt completely devoid of understanding of what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, that sounds like someone who sort of has a problem with fiction generally, or.
I think it didn't help that I was the writer and I was going to act in it as well. And sometimes people do write one-person shows that are about real things and they act in them, but not all the time. It's theatre. I was a theatre critic at Time Out, and there were some very good shows. Put it that way. I think I once went to see something that was written by, directed, and starring the same person, and it was very bizarre indeed. I'm not sure where I would have put my token. Your token.
It was in a small pub theatre, and I remember he made his entrance wobbling very slowly on a skateboard. So, you're in for an interesting theatrical experience when that happens.
I don't know that I could direct as well as write and act in it. I think having all credit to those who can, but I definitely need a set of eyes on the outside telling me not to do certain things, or
Yeah, I don't think this person could necessarily direct themselves. So, but it was very funny. I mean, the great thing about theatre, if you go and see something terrible, you'll always learn something about stagecraft from it.
Yeah, definitely.
About acting, about something. There's always something where you can kind of take away, they shouldn't really have done that, or that was the bit that worked. So I did find it very, very fascinating. Jenny, again, it can be from any aspect of your work. What was the bizarre or funny feedback you've received?
Well, it wasn't funny, but it struck me as bizarre. But I mean, maybe it's not even bizarre either. So I might have completely failed in this task. But when Before I Die came out, I got a lot of post, and it was kind of before the age of social media. You might get emails, but I got letters, physical letters sent to the publisher or my agent and forwarded to me in large envelopes. And I was struck by, there was probably only 5 of these, but they were all from the States. And they all said, there is no God in this book about death. And we would like to draw your attention to these biblical passages. And I found it quite frustrating because there weren't forwarding addresses, and even if there had been, I'm not sure I should have written lengthily about why I had made the decisions I had made. But to me, it felt like there was an enormous lot of love in the book, and that was the point. That although I wasn't suggesting that Tessa would get comfort from the fact, because she didn't believe that she would, there was any kind of afterlife in any sense other than I will feed the trees. She got a lot of comfort from thinking the kind of spiritual. She was spiritual. There was spirit that had an air of spirituality in it, and it also had a lot of love. But I was just really struck by, and I would look up these biblical passages that people sort of sent me to and think, well, I disagree with you, but I can't tell you why I disagree with you. And I just find it really surprising, because I think when you write, you're not necessarily, I mean, you want people to read your story, but you're not necessarily thinking what they'll think when they read your story. And it can be really surprising sometimes. Like when you do a text at A-level, and you're thinking, yeah, I wonder if the author thought this, that we're being asked a question about, or are we just all supposed... It is quite surprising how people read stuff into your books that you think, is it there? That I didn't mean it to be. Maybe it is there. And that was one of the things that wasn't there that people minded about.
I mean, I sort of missed those days, because people had to have quite a high level of organisation, didn't they? I mean, get the address, put a stamp on an envelope.
Yeah.
It's all a bit instant now. So a lot of people, when I ask about bizarre feedback, it tends to be Goodreads, and it tends to be things like the packaging was inadequate, or Amazon, one star. What was it? Somebody said that they objected to the smell of the book. The book didn't smell. So, I mean, at least people, they have enough forethought to get, find your agent, find the publisher. So they were quite polite letters, were they?
They were polite, but they were quite forthright as well. I was wrong, and I should have had, God should be in the book. There should be a kind of happy afterlife for Tessa. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and all different handwriting, I presume, as far as you could tell.
I don't think they're the same person. No. Well, that would be weird. Now you've scared me now. When I was at Time Out and I used to edit the letters page, there were a few people who kind of, made repeat visits, not really saying anything very new. And I don't know, as long as somebody was polite, we might put their feedback in. And I think now it's sort of got a bit impolite. I mean, Jenny, you must have done events. I think sometimes people say very startling things to authors at events. Have you ever had any weird experiences like that? I don't think so. I'm always struck by how well people have read the book. And I'm often struck when you have much younger audiences that they kind of ask things off the page, like, what would Tessa's favourite lip salve be, do you think? I'm like,
right.
I don't know. Let's decide between us. But there's a kind of a generosity, I think, to live audiences, which, especially if they've read the book. So I don't know. I haven't been faced with anything particularly challenging in a live audience, I don't think, but just a warmth and generosity of, it's lovely when people ask questions because they're coming from a place where they actually know the character really well. That's just so. Or people have done things that characters in the book have done. Somebody once told me that they'd planted a tree in their garden in memory of somebody because Tessa really wanted Adam to plant, I think it was an almond tree, I can't even remember now, but they'd done that, and I'm just like, that's just shocking. That's so stunning that you've read it that well, and then you've gone to the garden centre and bought a tree that's mentioned in a book and put it in your garden. That's great. Yes,
I suppose I think just thinking about weirdest thing that I've heard on stage when I was chairing somebody, and somebody put their hand up and said, "Oh, I like that other book that you wrote, which had happened to be a bestseller, and I've just read this one. I don't think it's nearly as good." And you would just sort of look at that person and they don't think they're being mean. They somehow think this is quite important feedback that the author needs to know. I mean, there's no way you can take that. I mean, the author just sort of said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll have to do better next time," and then move on. But yeah, I've had a few experiences like that where it's almost as if the person has forgotten that they're in a room with all these other people, and they're just making, they're just saying what popped into their head. For some reason. It's very odd. Anyway, I'm glad you've had such good feedback. We have been talking about Let the Light In, wonderful novel, YA novel, as per the YA tote bag I have here. A wonderful collaboration. May there be more. But in the meantime, I hope you have much success with this. I don't think we've given any spoilers, but it's a very thrilling read indeed, and well done. And you haven't fallen out. You're still happy with each other.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll do something else. Who knows? So thank you very much for squeezing into the book bag with me, Jenny Downham and Louis Hill, and I hope to see you again sometime in the real world. In the real world. Let's put our tokens in the real world bucket. Thank you very much. I shall see you anon. And thank you for joining us in the book bag, talking about Let the Light In, a YA novel that is not just for teenagers. I found it a very thrilling and perilous read. I was quite glad to see. No, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Join me next time when I shall find another fascinating author to talk to. Goodbye.